Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Mary Ryan and I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at Macquarie University. On behalf of the School of Education and Macquarie University alumni, I'd like to welcome all of our local and international guests from Australia and all around the world. For example, we have people zooming in from the UK, Canada, Spain, New Zealand, India, the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, South Korea, Czech Republic and Myanmar, just to name a few. And as special guests, the Macquarie Pro Vice Chancellor Research Innovation, Professor Dan Johnson, distinguished colleagues, representatives from our School of Education Advisory Board, Dr. Sally Howe, Ms. Danielle Cronin, Dr. Kate Liley, representatives from our hub schools, Carlingford West Public School and Linfield Learning Village, and our panellists, of course, who I will introduce shortly. So before we proceed, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. And I just want to explain the opportunity for us to show respect for our traditional owners and the continuing connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to country, and acknowledge that we're all visitors here to this land. I currently sit on Gadigal land and I pay my respects to those elders, and I acknowledge that these have always been places of learning and teaching, and we continue that tradition here at Macquarie University. So I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia, where you may be sitting now, and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to them, their culture and elders past, present and future. And I acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us this evening. So now an overview of tonight's event. So this annual event is a collaboration between Macquarie School of Education and Macquarie University alumni. This is the first time we've delivered it as a purely online event, so we're very happy to welcome guests not only from New South Wales, but also from across Australia and around the world. Our theme this year is 2020, Revisioning Education for the Future. This theme is very timely in that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a particular vision of modern education in the 21st century. However, with such a disruptive event as this pandemic, it requires us to revision or recalibrate our thinking about learning and teaching, as well as the purpose of education in a COVID-19 world. Medical experts suggest there will be other pandemics in the future. Hence, we need to be ready to address these challenges and support our students, families and teachers to be more prepared and resilient in uncertain times. So tonight's webinar will include a very brief overview of the School of Education, and then will be followed by our panel discussion. But before we move on to the update, some housekeeping. If you have any questions for the panel, please use the Q&A feature, as the audience will not have cameras or sound. And we don't have the chat function, so use the Q&A feature. We have a moderator tonight who will respond to questions posed via the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get to those questions if we can. But we've had a lot of questions sent in when you registered, so we'll start with those. And a recording and transcript will be sent out to everyone after the event. So our school, the Macquarie School of Education, has future-facing programs that have their foundations in interdisciplinary research and curriculum, and allows our students to learn discipline studies from experts across the university. So we team up education with business, education with science, education with psychology, education with the many disciplines of the arts. And so that's a real strength of our graduates. Our strength in stakeholder engagement and research also ensures that we're leading the way in enriching the lives of those who graduate. And in particular, we're improving life opportunities for children and young people. We're very proud of our current rankings as top 100 in the world and top 8 in Australia as a School of Education. And we've been named this year as field leaders in Australia in early childhood education and developmental disabilities. We're very diverse in our School of Education. We have flagship programs in early childhood, primary and secondary education. We have postgraduate education to PhD level, including masters in early childhood, in education, in inclusive and special education, and of course research pathways. We have our Academy for Continuing Professional Development in Education, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. We have Mia, our Child and Family Study Centre on campus for birth to 5. We have the Royal Institute for Deaf and Blind Children. We have conjoint appointments with those staff, and they're moving their schools onto our campus in the next couple of years, which is very exciting for us. We have the Macquarie University Special Education Primary School. And of course, we have the relationships with our hub schools, very strong relationships related to teaching and research and engagement. Carlingford West Public School and Linfield Learning Village. So I just want to talk to you now a little bit about how we conceptualise things in the School of Education. We've thought very deeply about our education programs, and we think about the kinds of graduates that we want to develop and we want to deliver to our profession. And so we started to think about a program logic, and what we came up with was our 5 R's framework. And so this is what we think that our teachers need to be capable of when they graduate from our programs. So first of all, resilience, practiced inside and outside of the classroom. Teachers need to be aware of and maintain their holistic health and sense of coherence. We've seen that this year. Resilience has become one of the #1 elements of our program logic, I think. This allows them to manage uncertain and complex issues and unexpected events when they arise in their career. Reflexive is the second R. So we want teachers to be reflexive in their teaching practice. Teaching is about understanding multiple and changing ecologies of learning, individual students' needs, the affordances of classroom spaces, student and teacher relationships, curriculum, research evidence, school culture, parental expectations, community demographics and needs, expectations of the profession and government policy, and weave all of that into their teaching. The third R is responsive. We want our teachers to be responsive to students, colleagues, parents, and professional communities. Teaching is a relational profession. Great teachers make deep connections with students, parents, and communities. Our next R is ready to learn. When teachers graduate from university, they're not at the end of their learning journey, but at the beginning. Ongoing pursuit of learning is a mark of a quality teaching profession. And finally, research engaged. We want our teachers to be research engaged throughout their careers. Effective teachers base their practice on evidence. The evidence can come from their own research in the classroom and from the latest academic research in specialist areas of learning, teaching, motivation, cognition, curriculum, technologies and spaces, to name a few. So using this 5 R's framework as a conscious guide can help teachers to stay focused on what is important. It can enable teachers to be sustained in their career and have the most positive impact that they can on students. We don't want our best teachers to burn out or leave the profession. We want them to thrive and achieve excellence so they can inspire our great minds of the future. So our research strengths in the school include early childhood education, digital technologies, language and literacies, educational leadership and organisation development, and education, diversity and inclusion. We also have emerging strengths in STEM. We've had a recent success in winning tenders for education systems and organisations such as New South Wales Department of Education and AITSL as well, projects for them. So our academy, which I referred to before, the Academy of Continuing Professional Development in Education, is focused on designing and delivering bespoke accredited professional development courses. And despite COVID-19, which has been very disruptive, we've had quite an active year. So we co-created with the Centre for Emotional Health here at Macquarie, COVID-19, We've Got You Covered. It's a website and resources for young people, educators and parents to help prevent anxiety and depression in children and young people during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've developed a whole school program of learning for the King's School, and welcome to those of you from the King's School here tonight. We had a cohort of 250 educators focused on learning and teaching through online delivery. We collaborated with Here For You, developing an online training program for mentors who work with young people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And we collaborated with the IBM Corporation. We designed and launched a free course for teachers on Coursera, Artificial Intelligence Education for Teachers. And that's available on the 26th of October. And we'll share a link to that course to all of our attendees here tonight. Mahidol University, we designed and delivered online course improving online learning and teaching for academic staff in the university, and particularly in light of this year, that's been most beneficial for them. And of course, the Professional Regulation Commission in the Philippines. We designed online short courses for teachers and educators, again, focusing on online learning and teaching. So that's just a snapshot, but it's been a very busy year in the Academy so far. So now to our webinar on 2020, Revisioning Education for the Future. We believe this webinar is the beginning of a conversation with our sector, and that it's timely to revision what education can look like over the next 20 years. What we do know is that the ongoing impact of COVID-19 requires us to reconceptualise our approaches to learning and teaching and education more broadly. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question as part of the registration process. We did receive hundreds of questions. So what we've done is we've looked at several themes. So we've grouped them around particular themes. And so there are 6 themes that we'll kind of touch on tonight, including the post-COVID-19 student, knowledge, skills and resilience. Secondly, the post-COVID-19 educator, agile, resilient, resourceful. Third, face-to-face versus online. What does the future of pedagogy look like? Fourth, curriculum issues. What needs rethinking? Fifth, schools and early childhood services, planning for the future. And 6, what is the role of families and carers in education moving forward? So now to our panellists. We invited these panellists to join our discussion because of their particular perspective on education and the workforce of the future. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Stephanie McConnell, who's the principal of Linfield Learning Village and also a Macquarie alumna. Mr. Andrew Williamson, who's the principal of Carlingford West Public School. Our industry partner, Ms. Natasha Copley, Director of Human Resources, ANZ DXC Technology, and also a Macquarie alumna. And from Macquarie University, Dr. Luke Toohill, who's the Director of our Mia Child and Family Study Centre. Associate Professor Tiffany Jones, a sociologist who researches LGBTIQ+ issues in education, education policy and social policy, and Associate Professor Matt Bauer, who specialises in the innovative use of technology for learning purposes. So now, I'm going to, before we start the discussion with our panellists, we'd like your feedback on your own personal experience of education in 2020 and your thoughts on the top issue for education in the future. So I'm going to launch an online poll, and it would be terrific if you could respond to the poll. Getting lots of responses there. That's excellent. I'll just wait another minute or so. Okay, so I might just, if anyone wants to quickly get in and put their answer in, I'm going to end the poll in a moment. Looks like we've got a very high percentage of people who've responded, so I think I'll end the poll so you can see those results. So what's been the most challenging aspect? Okay, so engaging students in online learning was the #1, but closely followed by the rapid shift to online learning. So, you know, we can see that you know, clearly we've got some particular kinds of answers this evening, given, you know, what all of our educators have been through over the past several months. But also meeting parent expectations in a changed environment isn't far behind. But people seem reasonably okay with managing work from home. A few people there, 10% of people indicated that. And the top issue for the future of education, so we've got curriculum redesign is the #1 issue, closely followed by face-to-face versus online and student engagement. And we're going to be touching on all of those issues tonight, so I'm very much looking forward to our panellists' answers to the questions this evening. Okay, all right, so now to move to the questions, and I'd ask all of our panellists to turn on their cameras now. Okay, have we got everyone? Excellent. So the first question is related to the post-COVID-19 student. What are the key capabilities we should be teaching our students to help them adapt rapidly to changing school and work environments? So I think I might throw to Luke first as an early childhood educator for his perspective.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, I think in early childhood education, this is something we probably think about already a lot, because our curriculum is not so much focused on content. We talk a lot about wanting to promote learning dispositions in the children that we work with. And so I think a lot of those dispositions that we were probably working with pre-COVID are still going to be really relevant post-COVID. So there are things like confidence, creativity, persistence, resilience, all of those kind of things that I think we hear, you know, talked about a lot now in the kind of post-pandemic or mid-pandemic world. But I think they're things in early childhood education we're focusing on anyway, in terms of helping to give children, you know, it's not so much about content or knowledge at that age, it's really about that disposition to be a confident, creative, curious person. And I think that adaptability that comes with those dispositions, you know, sets children up really well for future schooling, and then, you know, hopefully with the backing of the schooling system for future learning in adult life, just as much now as it probably did beforehand.
Luke, that's amazing. And I really hope those children from Mia come into our teacher education program.
We'll see what we can.
So I'm now going to throw to Stephanie for her perspective.
I agree with Luke, and I think that's not surprising that at Linfield we also see our learning characteristics as the priority for learning that to the extent that we have drawn together a range of international educational research to develop our 5 learning characteristics. So for us, it is about creativity, collaboration, being empathic, being resilient and being self-aware. And underneath each of those 5 characteristics, we've broken them down into 3 further sub-elements. And so we teach directly to those, and we actually assess against those elements as well, and have students self-assess and draw in their sort of growth in each of those areas throughout their time at school, from kindergarten all the way through to year 12. So I think they're things that that we know are central to the enterprise skills, the general capabilities, all of those things that have been pulled together in our thinking in that space. We need to prioritise content. Knowledge is not something that is unimportant, but at the heart of it, students can access knowledge if they are able to thrive in terms of those learning characteristics. So that's certainly a focus for us at Linfield.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephanie. And I'd like to ask Natasha now, as one of our industry partners, from her perspective.
So it certainly sounds a lot of the notes I had have already been covered. So it's great that the schools are preparing kids for coming into organisations like ours. I think I would definitely agree with Stephanie around that the learning or the knowledge isn't as important as being able to find knowledge or synthesise the data when it comes, particularly with the amount of it out there. The problem solving and creative thinking is really key. And what I think is really important is that blend of what you know and how you use it. So those behaviours that the schools are talking about, that's something that becomes increasingly important in the workplace. Is just because you're capable at doing something isn't as important as how you go about doing it in terms of bringing other people into that collaborative space. So that I think we're in very safe hands.
Excellent. Thanks, Natasha. So the second question related to the COVID-19 student is, how are or can socialising skills be developed in an online learning environment? What are some of the ways to keep learners or people who are socially isolated connected? So I think I might go to Tiffany for this one.
Hi everyone. So first of all, I wanted to note that both internationally, because we have an international audience, and in Australia, we have a really complex policy around ICT education. It's very varied, and we have sometimes contradictory curricula. So for example, in Australia, currently some ICT tools are banned at the state and in certain sector levels and in certain schools, particularly in primary schools. And yet general capabilities are required in the D&T and digital technology curricula, and essential in a pandemic. So I think we need to streamline that, and we need to finally accept that ICTs are core to schooling, period. Second, I did a 2018 study of 2,500 Australian students aged 14 plus, which suggested that exactly the approach I just heard everyone describing, which I term a critical, equitable use approach to ICT education, had the best outcomes for educational engagement, for achievement, and for social and mental health well-being for these students. And that was against, for example, approaches that were about restricting ICTs, banning certain programs. And there had been a big push in Australia for these sorts of bans on the basis of a false belief that they generate more bullying, more online bullying, and that they're a distraction from education. What the data shows was that the 23% of kids who are in schools with this critical equitable use approach, where they had access to ICTs, they had education on how to use it, they had education on how to use it in non-discriminatory ways, they saw a variety of people presented in what they were looking at. So that approach actually helped with their marks, and it actually gave them better resilience outcomes when they were bullied. Whereas in the schools where they had the bans, they actually had 49% who could not concentrate in class, so it actually decreased concentration, 35% dropped marks, 48% self-harmed, which was absolutely shocking to me. This was a rare approach, but it had a big mental health outcome in a negative way. 57% think about suicide and 19% attempt suicide. So I was really shocked by these findings. And I think that we need to be moving towards the whole one laptop, one child kind of approach, or in countries where a lot of people have their own supply, looking to supply ICT tools and skills, especially to those who don't have them, and thinking about how we educate them socially in an integrated manner, using some of the tips already said by my colleagues in this presentation.
Thanks, Tiffany. How about you, Matt? Oh, Matt, you're on mute at the moment. This is the phrase of 2020.
I always do it. Yeah, look, I think I totally agree with Tiffany. We really need to take responsibility as an education system and as teachers. Instead of putting it in the too hard basket and banning it, we need to develop children's self-regulation capabilities with respect to technology so that they become empowered users of technology. There's lots of ways that we can help children to become more social and develop their skills in online environments. And a lot of the fundamental principles are the same in terms of face-to-face versus online communication, you know, showing respect, active listening, positive communication, establishing rapport. But it's just enacted in different ways when you're working online. So checking about when it's okay to use the microphone, and using video and text to demonstrate your engagement, positive language, demonstrating care for others and showing interest in them. So all of those things are the same fundamentally, just in the online environment, we need to teach children different ways of doing it. I think we need to, if we're going to be shifting, particularly if COVID continues, to more social time online, we need to really sort of focus on that and make that part of the school day, using rich modalities so that they can really create that rapport with one another and get that better connection, rather than just, for instance, using text asynchronously or not in real time. Doesn't really have the same social impact. So, and if people are interested in, from a research perspective, what are some of the things that you can follow up in terms of developing social capabilities online and ways to do it, you can have a look at work by Moore on transactional distance, because what we're trying to do is overcome that transactional distance that people sometimes feel. And we're trying to create a sense of presence and co-presence through formation of a community of inquiry. So those are some of the key sort of research words you could be following up on.
Fantastic, thank you both. So now I'm going to move to the post-COVID-19 educator. So the first question there is, reflecting on the disruptions to education in 2020, what can educators do differently in the future to better prepare for major disruptions? Andrew, I'll go to you first this time.
Thanks, Mary. From my perspective as a school in the same situation as everyone else, I guess from being agile, understanding what's coming, looking forward, I think the biggest thing that we did at our school, which allowed us to prepare, was we could see it coming through our community feedback. We're lucky, we've got a very Chinese-based community at the moment, so we were sort of told what was coming early on. But the advantage for us to be able to keep an eye on what's coming in the future, looking at the news, other aspects of what's going on in the world, but also keeping students as the first and foremost in all actions we do. We were ready to move them online. We had sampled lessons, tried things, prepared for things, because I have an amazing team who developed that for me. We had the goals, we had a shared vision, but the main thing was we kept our students as the centre for everything we decided we were doing, and their well-being, their health was our priority. So that's how we sort of dealt with it. And I think moving forward, if you're looking forward and you're looking to see what's coming rather than sitting back and being complacent about where you are, I think every school leader, every school will be ready for the future.
Thanks, Andrew. And what about in early childhood, Luke?
I mean, I think it's a similar kind of thing. I mean, I think for me, one of the things is just now that we've kind of been through this once, I think you learn a lot from that experience. And I think we weren't really, intellectually we might have known that this could happen, but I think we didn't really realize what it would feel like and what it would be like to go through it. So I'm not sure you can specifically prepare, because who knows, the next disruption might be something that is completely different. But I think that experience of having been through disruption helps you to feel like at least you know a bit what to expect. And I have to say, for us, one of the things was, in early childhood settings, we were largely still open and operating right throughout the whole period. And I think there was certainly, as Andrew said, certainly that focus on children as being, the real important focus of what we were doing. But it was also looking, I guess, at how families reacted and looking at, family wellbeing as well as just child wellbeing, and also the other side of it, educator wellbeing as well. That I think for the educators, there was that real sense of, some of us were also, scared and anxious and not sure about what was happening, as well as the children and family. So I think it is thinking about how all of those things come together that will be really important. But I think that in some ways, sort of seeing that it has been done as successfully as it has been done, I think gives us confidence that we can deal with things into the future and deal with the next sort of issue when it comes up.
So when we get through this pandemic or the new normal settles, what are some of the important practices we've adopted that you think will stay? Stephanie?
I think what's been really interesting about this experience is, and it's interesting that in the poll you just did, Mary, that the biggest issue was about curriculum redesign, because I think that's our new normal, and what's been a benefit, without preempting future questions, of the pandemic experience is that we've been thrown into a situation where we've had to rapidly redesign curriculum for online delivery. So I think, however, what it's shown us is that we don't, well, certainly in the experience we've had at Linfield, is that you don't have to have a teacher standing in front of a group of 30 students for learning to happen. And I think that's a really important shift in our thinking. And if I were to sort of think about what we do in an innovative learning environment at Linfield, it's constantly to challenge mindset in teachers to think differently about what their default position is. And I often talk about teacher default positions, because being aware of what we shift to in our mindset and in our practice when we feel uncomfortable is often the thing that we need to really be aware of in shifting away from, because we shift towards control always. And we've been thrust into a situation where we are not in control. And that's, I think, being challenging for a lot of people. However, I think we've got to recognise, as we all know fundamentally, but learning can happen anywhere. And for us, it's about opening up those possibilities to occur for students to learn anywhere, anytime, on any device, as Tiffany sort of mentioned, the importance of technology in all of this. So for us, our curriculum redesign shifted rapidly because of COVID, because we looked at it as an opportunity, and we moved towards what we call a quest-based learning, which we have then continued when students returned to school. So it's really prioritising student voice and choice in their learning, because we found in the surveys that we did of parents and students during the COVID season, when they were in the home learning stage, that parents were really struggling most. So we needed to build in a whole lot more choice. And so we leapt forward in our thinking at Linfield towards some of our horizon goals. So the two of those are removal of the timetable and transdisciplinary learning. So it allowed us those sorts of opportunities. And in coming back and what we sort of want to hold on to in the new normal are some of those things, I think. What we've learnt from this experience in leaping into the unknown, what we've learned about ourselves and our mindset as teachers, I think is really critical.
Thanks, Stephanie. And what you've said there about that, the default position and the mindset, that's that reflexivity that we try and get at here in our programs at Macquarie.
And I'll just say, sorry, while you're saying that, the other thing that you talked about in the R's is very central to this whole concept, and that is about responsiveness. So we've designed a whole pedagogy of responsiveness in alignment with this.
Excellent. And Natasha, what about you in industry?
So I was just saying, as both a parent and a member of industry, it's been a really interesting time. And I think that there's a lot of parallels with what Stephanie was saying with what I've seen in our business. And I think one of the things that will come out of this is what I'm calling institutional resilience. So while all the individuals in the organisation will have, as Luke mentioned, experience disruption, come through the other side and have a greater awareness of how quickly the world can change, I think institutions as well that may have been in the past quite reluctant to change and move have seen what can happen and how quickly change can happen under pressure. So I think that's a really good thing that could come out of this. I think from the, again, in both that technology and learning space, again, as a parent and a technology industry, is that greater acceptance of the technology piece that I think as parents didn't we kind of realise quite the power for good it could be, as well as the power for not so good. And then I think the other couple of things that I would say is that this connection between home and work, where the whole person can be seen. Whereas in the past, you know, it was funny to post a video when somebody's kid walked in the background. Now there was a very great realization that as people were on calls like this during the workspace, they quite likely had a child next to them that they were trying to help through at the same time. And that given that was a shared journey, I think that blend and that acceptance of the family and the work piece coming together more is going to be a really positive change. And I think the last one would just be the mental health piece, that there is a great awareness that kids, adults, businesses, lots of people are struggling with the events that have occurred with COVID, and that's led to a much more open conversation that I think can only be good at both the school level and the industry level.
Fabulous. I really like what you said about institutional resilience, and I talk about that in some of my work around teacher education in terms of a resilient profession as well.
Yes.
You know, I think it's not only at the individual level, but it is also at that institutional and professional level. Yeah, fantastic. So now we move to some questions on face-to-face versus online. So the first question, how do you envision the relationship between face-to-face teaching and online learning in the future? Matt?
Thanks, Mary. So, look, it's a really interesting question, and often face-to-face is put in opposition. You know, it's one or the other. And I really like the idea, and Andrew and I were actually talking about this earlier today, that it doesn't need to always be a choice. And in the future, we might have this idea that it doesn't matter where you're located. You can be in the face-to-face classroom, you can be located remotely, but you can still participate in a lesson. And I think there's a lot of technologies that are helping us to trend towards that. Microsoft's doing work on holograms and videogrammetry, using immersive virtual reality. The idea that you could 3D render what's happening in a class in real time and have someone put on their IVR headsets and just beam into that class. Fundamentally though, I think it's really important to point out that technology in so many instances, and I think fundamentally, is the mediator. I really always try to take that view that technology is just helping the pedagogy to happen. It's facilitating it. The underlying pedagogies that we're going to draw upon, this idea of social learning, this idea of constructive learning, this idea of connected learning, all of those pedagogies are very much facilitated through the technology and still rely totally heavily on the teachers. So it's really critical that teachers have a great sense of pedagogy fundamentally, but also now know how to select and use technologies to instantiate that pedagogy.
Thanks, Matt. Andrew?
Thanks, Mary. Matt, yeah, we did talk earlier today. We're talking about this project that I'm working on with some great teachers we've got and a partner school in Gold, which is down the Murray River. And we're working on virtual reality at the moment where we're actually using Oculus virtual reality goggles, and the two teachers are then teaching 1,000 kilometres apart, but in the same room using their avatars, which the kids can then zoom in, and they're able to grab videos, grab examples, conduct experiments on the Murray River, and be able to do it all live, and the kids can beam in. So I think that what we've learned from this is we've got to embrace the technology. This was something that came out of the learning journey for us that we felt we were very prepared for, but we also had to develop new ways moving forward. So I was talking to you about today, and I think it's very exciting that we're moving into this virtual teaching world. And I guess as technology changes, it won't be putting on goggles, it'll be putting on your glasses and you'll be able to move into your virtual room. Then, okay, goggles off, we're going back to a literacy lesson. I think that's the important thing, is that we need to keep that disparity between the virtual world, the engaging in technology, but also the face-to-face and the everyday education. And I've got some great teachers working on it at the moment. And I think that what they're doing is they're recognising that this is a great space for learning, it's a great tool, but the actual everyday the social interaction between teachers and students is still very important, very big part of where we're moving. So I guess that's what we're seeing come out of face-to-face and online, and I think it's a collaboration between the two for moving forward, and I think it's exciting times for education to be able to embrace this world. And if it ends up being where we're going down the line of virtual teaching, it's a great opportunity to try something new, whether it be 1,000 kilometres apart or the other side of the world. Two teachers working together in the same classroom is pretty exciting. So I guess it's got to be a balance, and of course student welfare and family welfare at the end of that is still the important part. So
thanks, Andrew. And with the tyranny of distance in Australia, I think, you know, you've really hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we can do to support colleagues who are even in quite remote areas in Australia using technology. Fantastic. So next question, do you see secondary education moving towards a more permanent hybrid model of education? What limitations and impacts do you think that would have on schools and students? Stephanie?
Yes, I think interesting question, and I guess I've reflected on this across, I'm in a K-12 school, so not just in secondary. I think I agree with what Matt and Andrew have said, that and we know that blended learning has been a model that's been around as a concept for a little while, but we haven't really been thrown in the deep end with it, unlike what we have this year. It was also our model for stage 6, year 11 learning pre-COVID, because it allows for continuity for students in learning if they are unwell or if they're, for whatever reason, unable to come to school. So we know all of the positives around that. And I think the key with it is really to remain flexible and to accommodate students in terms of their technology needs as well. And that's been pointed out several times today. And in terms of their capabilities as well with technology. We assume that students have access to technology and to the internet, and that's not always the case, especially when working from home and other family members require access to particular devices. That makes it difficult. So we always need to remain flexible in this space, I think. But the point is that we now know we can do it, and we need to continue to evolve our learning around the pedagogies of online and or blended learning. And I think as has been mentioned, the right way forward is a combination of both, and to really explore the success measures that we might need to further enhance in this space as well. Because what we found most prominently, and I think we've all experienced it ourselves in this sort of forum, is what is lost in the remote learning experience is connection, and the ability of a teacher to pick up the nuances that are unspoken within a classroom space. And when you can't see that, you've got to rely on other things to give you that information, which is really important, I think, in reading how students are going and travelling, particularly from a wellbeing perspective. So that may well be a matter of us needing to just retrain our brains and our thinking again, and our default position, our mindset around what that looks like in an online space. And having been part of a fantastic Catalyst lab program, so Catalyst Lab's part of the Department of Education Innovation Exploration, and I was a recipient, a learner in an online learning environment, and I would reiterate that from the learner's perspective, that you lose something in the online environment, so we've got to look at ways that we can do that. So when we are face to face, we really want to be using that time to build connection and to really design the learning that way.
Nice. Tiffany, what's your perspective?
So I actually agree with this idea of hybrid education being expanded in a more permanent way for secondary schooling. I think that we should be moving towards a model that really embraces multi-platform and, where possible, low bandwidth education, because one of the limitations I just wanted to pick up on is distance for some students is accessibility to good quality internet, good quality tools, remembering that socio-economic differentiation we have in Australia and in many countries around the world. So we've got organisations like the World Bank that are currently looking into funding projects in this space in different countries around the world that I'm really excited about. But I also wanted to point to an interesting use of TV-based education in Queensland this year. And we sort of did that in an ad hoc way. I'd like to be looking at TV channels being employed, now that they're not employed in quite the same way they used to be, as an asset that we can use towards education. So it's not just online education, we've got TV education, we've got radio-based items, as well as visits to workplaces when there's not restrictions in place, and other sorts of ways of contacting and learning. So I think that's really the way that things will move forward. And it's just, I'm flagging that there's equity-based considerations that mean we have to emphasise low bandwidth provision, and especially in a time where, where we see some greater unemployment and greater shifts to government-based provisions of education. We'll have to really think about that.
Natasha?
But again, it's really interesting listening to it, because obviously I've been imagining it in the kind of return to work context rather than the return to school, but a lot of the challenges seem quite similar. I think in terms of the hybrid piece, as a parent, I would love to see that hybrid's happening at school, not at home, because that presents a number of challenges to me personally, but also to the organisation. We found that was one of the biggest impediments in terms of, for that. But I think also there's the other consideration we have is that that notion of the safe space at home. Now, whether that's an ergonomically safe space or a physically safe space or a psychologically safe space, is often we make assumptions that because it's home, it's an okay place to conduct work or to conduct schoolwork. And so I think that's a really important consideration as we move to whatever hybrid model there is. I think loving that technology, I think there's enormous potential both now and into the future in terms of what technology can do, but as always, it's making sure that it's used in that way that enhances the experience and it's elevates the learning rather than takes over the learning from a technology perspective. And I think that notion of the importance of connection and the power of the incidental face-to-face experience is one of the things that we consider at work, that it's difficult to quantify, it's difficult to plan or to put into place, but ultimately it can be the most powerful part of the workday, and similarly I think the most powerful part of the school day as well.
Thank you. So the next couple of questions are about curriculum issues. And this first question is interesting, given that quite a few of you mentioned creativity, critical thinking, those kinds of skills in your remarks at the beginning. So this question is, with the recent federal government decision to encourage STEM-style courses at the expense of arts-based courses at tertiary level, how do you see the future of the creative arts within the secondary context? Tiffany?
Okay, well this is quite a big shift. And I think that reduced funding for arts-based study at the tertiary level is based on quite a narrow and functionalist view of education that reduces it to job preparation, especially for the lower middle and lower working classes of people who are having government education in the main, where there won't be arts supplemented in quite the same way if we're not careful to fight for it. And I think we could lose a lot of critical thinking. And I think it's based on an inaccurate idea of what the economy is, because we have this idea that it's a STEM economy and an arts economy. And it's not a STEM economy and an arts economy. It's a mixed economy with the expansion and digitisation of the arts, with the moves online, with cybersecurity as a growth industry that requires arts knowledge as well as technical knowledge. We actually need people who are multi-skilled, interdisciplinary individuals. So I'm quite worried about this real reductionist view of what we could be providing and what the future generations of citizens who are dealing with the really complex existential crises that we face in our time might need to solve these problems. And I want to just bring everyone's attention to how in the UK, and I know we have some UK members in our audience, maybe they can comment on this. In the UK, I think it was about 2003, early 2000s, there were big cuts to arts and cuts to arts education in the UK. And the Warwick Commission report found that this created a big socio-economic divide in the UK between white upper classes' access to and literacies in arts and arts-based economies and mixed economies, which are multi-billion-dollar economies, and everybody else who felt very disenfranchised from the arts and from that kind of future. There were 15 to 50% drops in student enrolments in design and technology, drama and other arts subjects, and therefore losses of teachers and expertise in the area. There were downward participation trends even in things like 0 to 5-year-old junior girls dance. I mean, there was a lot of reduction of arts participation all round. And again, this old mentality that didn't fit the modern day and the opportunities available. And since then, since 2015 plus, I believe, the UK has been trying to fix that mistake and to pump over £100 million pounds of education investment into bringing arts education back in. And I think we need to start thinking about how arts is part of a mixed economy, part of a nation's soft power, those who determine the narratives and determine the identities that we see and hear and listen to and watch have influence on us. So we need to start thinking about arts in a much more complex way and maybe looking at how we can look at the new type of arts that need to be part of our schooling.
Natasha, what about from an industry perspective?
I would have to say, and as a self-declared arts graduate, very equally concerned about the kind of dichotomy that's it's an either or. And I think for us, we're a digital technology company, and ironically, it is the art skills that are becoming increasingly important in the digital technology, more so than straight technical skills. And by that I mean problem-solving skills, data synthesis, creative thinking, human-centered design. So it's a very, I mean, I'm sure we've all been victims of technology that wasn't designed with the human at the center. It's incredibly frustrating and leads to poor personal outcomes, poor user outcomes, and poor business outcomes. So I think that this notion, and I think Matt referenced it earlier, this kind of dichotomy, it's either STEM or arts. It's either black or it's white. It's grey, and I think the more, and I say this with a child obsessed with robotics and STEM, which I think is fantastic. But it is the creativity that you bring to technology. It's the problem that you're trying to solve with the human in mind that is really the key to successful technology implementation. So I would agree. STEM and creativity and creative arts is definitely the way to go.
Terrific. So what pedagogy or management systems have you seen to support individual learning plans for all students? Andrew?
From my perspective around pedagogy management systems, I don't know if there's a clear winner on all, but what I will say is that I think listening to the students, understanding the students and understanding where they want to go with their education and learning, listening to your teachers, giving the teachers time to actually investigate the curriculum they're teaching and give them time to understand the language behind that and to implement it in clear guidelines. I think that we find very rushed in our curriculum at the moment. I'm not sure if other people agree with that, but I think there's a lot of rush to try and get through all the topics you've got to get through with all the outcomes, make sure our students achieve this mark, this percentage. But I think the actual reality is if we actually understand where the students are, take time to understand the curriculum, make sure we're producing a quality learning environment for them all, I think that your management style there will provide for students and curriculum change, and also give students the ability to achieve their greatest aspects of what they're learning. So I think, I don't know if I've seen a particular system other than I think quality education around quality teaching where you actually understand the students and you understand the curriculum you've got to teach. I think that's one of the big things I'm finding at the moment with a large school, 1,700 students and a large staff population. and a varied age difference in our population of students, teachers, and I think that the teachers who are coming into the curriculum, to give them the knowledge of the expert teachers is something which is really powerful at the moment we're working on. And I think that's something where we need to look at how we're making sure that these teachers are able to deliver a quality curriculum once they're in the classroom. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but certainly where I see management styles, management systems having to adapt to meet the needs.
Thanks, Andrew. What about you, Stephanie?
I think this area is what we have spent our last 18 months of existence trying to develop at Linfield Learning Village. So we are a new school that only opened in January last year with quite a different educational model. So in terms of that pedagogy space, we have been working on 3 pedagogical modes that we use in both our online and face-to-face learning environments. So the concept of the masterclass, which is the sort of lesson delivery information. It's explicit teaching, but it's not in the sense of a chalk and talk teacher standing in front of a group of 30 students. We teach in a stage-based learning environment at Linfield in open learning spaces, so it's quite a flexible approach. A pop-up is another lesson pedagogical mode that we use, and that is, as I mentioned earlier, Mary, in terms of our pedagogies of responsiveness. So it's really being in a space where we are responding to the needs of the students in front of us at the time, and a teacher or a student could run a pop-up lesson on a particular aspect of the learning that's come up. And then the third area is what we call flow or deep learning. And that can happen either individually or collaboratively within the space. And I hear Andrew's pain in trying to come up with a learning management system that captures that in a way that's been really effectively designed for the way we want to be moving forward. We've chosen Canvas as our learning management system. And I know that a lot of schools, particularly here in New South Wales, are moving to use Canvas as their learning management system. There are plenty of them on offer. We use Seesaw more so in our K-2 hub space to communicate learning with parents. Students, little ones can sort of hold up their learning achievement for the day and speak to it, and that is then recorded and shared as part of their learning portfolio. We also, as a staff, spent a long time last year developing what we called at the time the mothership of I can statements. And this was our attempt to do exactly what you've just asked in that question around designing individual learning. So for us at Linfield, that's at the heart of what we do. How do we meet the needs of every student in terms of their individual learning pathway? So our I can statements are every curriculum outcome from kindergarten syllabus through to the Year 12 syllabus we have rewritten as an I can statement. So a student can see where they are on that trajectory, and they can also look at the I can statement for what they have achieved on a 5-point mastery scale from novice to master. But they can also look at what it also incorporates into that I can statement, what they need to do to move on to the next step of their learning journey. We've also built those to incorporate the learning characteristics rubric that we have developed on those 5 learning characteristics that I mentioned earlier. So we've then also, because Canvas is the best system that we could come up with, that we could find to deliver some of that learning, we've added on top of that, we've built a system with Octopus BI this year to gather in. So Octopus actually draws from Canvas and Compass and a couple of other sources to give us a snapshot in time data piece on each child in terms of their learning journey, so that we can produce that at any point in time. We've used PAT testing and it draws on their NAPLAN data as well as other things to triangulate as we go, so that we can capture quite accurately where a student is in terms of their progress at any point in time.
Thanks. What about in early childhood, Luke?
I think it's probably a little different in early childhood, because I think traditionally early childhood has been very much focused on the individual child. So that idea of individual learning plans is very much what we work with. And in terms of that idea of being very kind of responsive to children, that's really, I guess, sort of the bread and butter of being an early childhood teacher, is how you are responsive in the moment to the child. I think for us, one of the things, or in early childhood, one of the things to think about is, as we see more and more digital technology coming into what we're doing, and there are more and more, I guess, platforms that are designed to share information digitally with families, is there can be a tendency for that to kind of really focus on the individual and kind of be, you know, piping that information about the individual child straight to the individual family. And I think one of the other things we really want to focus on is the social side of learning. So that while we want to focus on the individual within that, we know learning, you know, works best when it's a social experience. So we don't want to allow, I guess we don't want that technology to push us into this kind of very much an individualized reporting format for each child to their family, without then recognizing the role that other children play in that and making it a more social record of learning rather than just an individual record of learning. So I think it's almost flipping it the other way and trying to remember the social side as well as the individual side.
Nice. So the next couple of questions are about schools and early childhood services planning for the future. So to the principals on the panel, has the pandemic of 2020 helped or hindered your school's efforts to revision education for the future? Stephanie?
Definitely helped, and I think it took us a little bit of time to just deal with the initial shock, although we were in a really good space in having developed the systems I just described, which allowed us to transition really effectively. However, we decided quite quickly to shift into a space of taking the bull by the horns and looking at this as an opportunity. And we went into a phase that we called Learning Goes Audacious at Linfield Learning Village. So we wanted to really tap into our values, and that is being brave and tenacious, holding lightly to things, and moving rapidly and shifting as we need to respond. So that's where I think it really also reminded us of the importance of well-being for everyone. So that whole concept of Maslow before Bloom's. So it was very much about how we were able to take advantage of the fact that in New South Wales we have an Educational Authority Board, NESA, that we refer to it as for those international guests, who regulate everything that we do across our schooling system, and they relaxed some of their requirements this year. So we saw that as a gap that we jumped straight through, and in order to say, well without, and probably it's more, it allowed the opening of that mindset for teachers to say, okay, we are constantly driven by that pressure, external pressure and fear of what happens, you know, what might happen to us if we don't follow the way we've always done things. And I think that little bit of a gap in that pressure for teachers allowed them to look at things differently without having to manage that constant fear that we see in education, which I think was really an incredible positive.
Thanks, Stephanie. Andrew?
I guess from my point of view, I think it was a bit of a double-edged sword, really. I think it would help, but also hindered. I actually found, we're in a good place because we're a one-to-one device school. We've got iPads galore, we've got technology galore. We're using interactive equipment, but like we were ready to go. We set up a parent help desk where we had parents coming in. We had specialist staff supporting them, making sure they were able to get online, handing out devices to our community who didn't have devices. We were lucky. I mean, there's schools out there that couldn't even have kids who logged online. So therefore they were handing out paper copies of work, and it's very different aspects. So I guess from our point of view, yes, it helped us to reinforce where we've been going, but that's also our location, our socioeconomic status, our community. And the other side of it all, the well-being, Stephanie touched on the well-being. I think there was a lot of issues there, making sure we are touching base with our students. We were following up a lot of students, individually talking to the parents, the students, making sure that the student was okay. It raised a lot of awareness where sometimes, you know, you see some things in the background of the Zooms, which weren't always the best things in the world. You saw a lot of individual things that went on. And I think the well-being of our staff was obviously a big issue around supporting them, but also the students. So a bit of a double-edged sword. Has it helped? Yes, we're moving forward. We're embracing technology. We're supporting that. Has it hindered? Yes, because I believe that some of the things that some people went through in families, maybe not in my community, but in communities across the state and across the world, have certainly had to suffer. And I think that where I believe our education hasn't stopped and has, if anything, grown and gone forward, other situations and other centres may not have been that lucky a good position to be in. So that's probably, yeah, I think it's a bit of give and take.
Thanks, Andrew. Luke?
I think in early childhood, I mean, certainly for us, I think it's probably hindered us this year in the sense that it's really, meant that we haven't been able to do a lot of things that we would have liked to do. And I think probably in early childhood as well, because that sort of digital or online solution isn't really, certainly isn't a viable long-term solution. I think we certainly were very conscious of maintaining a connection with families, and we used an online platform to share our educators reading stories and doing songs and those kind of things for children at home. And the feedback we got from families was that was really, it was really appreciated. It certainly maintained that connection so that children still knew who we were when they returned. But I don't think that's ongoing. Like, that's not a long-term solution for early childhood. That's a stopgap that got us through that real crisis period. So I think, in that way, it certainly slowed us down. But I think also it made us probably appreciate more the things that you sometimes take for granted, like, just that real foundation of relationships to everything that we do, and that real importance of relationships. And particularly in early childhood, those personal relationships you have with children and families are so, they are so key. And you realize when you're having digital relationships that you lose a lot in that there's not that same sense of connection. So I think in some ways, yes, it's probably slowed us down, but it's maybe also made us stop and think about what's actually most important in what we want to promote and what we want to be doing moving forward. So that potentially is a positive as well.
Recently, there's been a lot of interest in curriculum renewal. So why do we need to keep looking at curriculum? Isn't it just the same content? Tiffany?
Okay, so controversial. Look, I think we have to give up on the idea that curriculum is going to be a stagnant monolith through time. But also, I take issue with some of the neoconservative pushes back to basic skills again that we're seeing in, for those of us who don't know, in some of our curricular areas in Australia, which reduce curricula to rote learning, job preparation, very basic standards, which is a pre-modern platform. I think we need to be thinking about changing curricula for the times, for the complexity of the times, for the nuances of the times, for the issues that'll be faced, for the complex economies that we're going to see increasingly into the future. And something actually a good friend of mine, Keita Takayama, said was that we have to be suspicious of some of the claims for the changes. So the claims behind why a change is occurring. So he noted that in Japan, people who wanted to push this kind of basic skills, rote learning approach often used PISA and would cherry pick which countries did well. And then you get sort of Scandinavian countries which had a very liberal and different complex curricula, with principals having a lot more control over the schools that they were in. So there was complexity and nuance. As you can see tonight, our principals are very capable of coming up with locally relevant programs. So I think we just need to be suspicious of some of these claims that that's what PISA is really showing is best. And we need to think about letting go of the idea that curricula is going to be the same forever, but also very careful about what it changes to and what it focuses on. And I think you've heard, so I won't keep repeating it, some of the foci that we all think is going to be important into the future.
Thanks, Tiffany. Matt?
Yeah, thanks. And look, totally agree with Tiffany. And my area is technology. So that's obviously one that we just, because the world is changing at such an increasingly rapid pace, we really need to just keep the curriculum relevant. AI, data mining, machine learning, AR, VR, mixed reality, 3D design, printing, haptic. The thing about those technologies, though, is that they're not just in the technologies discipline. That technology is changing our world. It's changing all discipline areas and the things that you can do for teaching, but also the sorts of things you might learn in the discipline, the ways you might act in the discipline. What a historian used to do before technology is now radically different to what they would do with technology. So we really need to make sure that we're keeping our curriculum relevant. What's also really interesting to me, and I totally agree with some of the other thoughts that have come through from other panelists tonight about, you know, moving into sort of communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. And a lot of the ways that we are now approaching the curriculum are so far more broad than they would have used to have been. So I think we should try and really be ambitious in terms of where we pitch our curriculum. If we were going to continue to expand out the curriculum and look at interpersonal, intrapersonal, holistic, interconnected ways of approaching the curriculum, what would that look like? It would, you know, I think there are some real opportunities to continue to push the curriculum well beyond where it is now. But underneath it all, it's that sense of inquiry and curiosity and enterprise. And we need to model that as teachers in the way we go about teaching and designing curriculum if we want to engender those sort of mindsets and dispositions in our students.
Thanks, Matt. Andrew, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, the world moves so fast, we need to move fast. The kids are evolving every day. What technology, Matt, what was recent yesterday is now old today. I think things are growing so fast. Yes, we need to move curriculum. We also, though, do need to recognise that kids still need to be able to, in the current world, read, write, add up. So, crude terms, I know, but I think we need to be a balanced curriculum. We need to make sure that we are progressing it forward, but we've also got to make sure our kids are learning the basics as well. So probably a little bit different to Tiffany and Matt there. And in fact, I still think we need our basics, a bit more traditional, but I think that we need to evolve and move forward and challenge things. And I think that's what we're doing. And I think we need to do we need to do it faster? I guess the world's moving faster every day of the week. So I guess we do need to evolve curriculum, but I think keeping a perspective on the basics also is important. So I'm probably a little bit more conservative than everyone else, but I think it's important to evolve with curriculum and make it evolve with us. So.
Thanks, Andrew. So now to move to the role of families and carers in education moving forward. What are some key points to share with parents or carers about the future of education post-COVID-19? Stephanie?
I think that parents generally are looking for something different for their children in this 21st century environment. I think, as Andrew's pointed out, we're all very aware of the rapidly changing world that we live in, and that acknowledgement that the education experience that they may have had whilst at school is you know, has shifted significantly for their own children. What we want is to, you know, we've talked about the capabilities and the dispositions that we know are important for students to learn, and parents need to shift their thinking into those spaces as well. They know that truth, but in my experience, the reality of that, and I'm just very conscious that I've got a parent online, at least one tonight, but it's for all of us, it's a learning community experience, and I think that's what's critical. They definitely want something different for their children, and they're open to learning themselves about what that might look like. It's just the expectations need to shift a little bit to accommodate that, because we filter that through our own learning experiences, and that's perfectly normal. And so, you know, when their child comes home, speaking differently about, for example, the concept of homework. So we don't talk about homework at Linfield Learning Village, but what we say is that learning doesn't stop at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So learning continues, and we want to encourage that ongoing learning beyond school. So for a parent who is very much considers that their child is learning, if they can see that they're sitting down every afternoon and doing this math sheet and doing this sort of spelling work, yes, acknowledge, Andrew, literacy and numeracy are critical skills that they need to learn, but within the broader context of shifting what it might look like for parents as well. And I think parents are a really critical voice in this conversation around the education revolution, the shift in thinking around the ATAR and the value of the ATAR. And it does require them to be a little bit brave as well in that space, because that number at the end of year 12 for a parent is something that they define in a particular way, but I think we've got to educate parents that is something that's really shifting in the thinking, particularly I would expect from what I've, the work I've done with a number of universities in terms of their expectations and the way that we then transition students into the world beyond school in further education as well. So we've just got to work alongside them in that journey, I think.
Mm. And it's interesting you talk about the ATAR, Stephanie. I mean, we take actually quite a different view of that now in universities, and in fact, probably less than half of our students now come in on an ATAR. So it's, we have a lot of different entry programs, and, our data show that those students do just as well, if not better, than those who come in on an ATAR. So, it's interesting, and I think the high pressure we have around that, and I am conscious that HSC exams exams are going on this week, but, it's some of that pressure, I think, and the well-being that we need to consider around some of those issues are really important. So thank you for raising that. Andrew.
Yeah, I actually agree with Stephanie, but I also think that, and I know Stephanie does this because it's bread and butter for what we do, but it's about developing that trust with the community trusting in you as the leader of their education facility to make sure that we provide for children. Parents send their child happily through a gate every morning. At the moment, they stop at the gate and they send them through a gate, and they don't really know what happens, so they've got to trust what's happening beyond that gate, and that the care you're providing for them, whatever the environment might be, is at the highest quality that they can access at that point in time. And I think that's something which we as educators strive to do. It's something that we pride ourselves on, and it's something that relationship that we build up with our communities is what makes a school a school. I mean, a successful school is one that has a community that supports it, trusts it, believes in it. And if parents trust and believe in what's going on with their student, the student will learn, reach their full potential. They'll believe in the teacher that you've put in front of that classroom as the best guide for you to provide for that child for that year. It's the same as university, Mary. If students come to you, you're putting the best lecturers in front of them. We're putting the best teacher we can put in front of them. And I think that's the greatest thing that will come out of COVID-19 is that relationship you have with your community. The fact that you can say to a parent, trust us, we know what we're doing. We supported your child through this bad time. We're supporting you as a family through this time. We'll work together and we'll achieve great things. And I think that's really important for us to remember that, it is about that trust, that relationship you build up with your community. And that's what allows us to achieve things with the students and create a future for our world and curriculum and whatever else we might want to change. But yeah, I think that's the most important part.
Thanks, Andrew. So how will families be involved in the preschool education of their children in the future? Luke?
I mean, I would hope that probably as they have been in the past, in that they would be very directly and personally involved. And I think, probably more than any of the other forms of education we've got represented tonight, early childhood education, we have that really direct connection with families in that families are there every day. And I know for a lot of services that have made that decision this year where they might have decided that families aren't able to come into their service, they have to drop at the door. That's been a real loss in terms of that family connection. I mean, I guess one of the things that we made the decision to do was not to go down that way and to still allow families to come in and obviously be sensible of that, but to keep that going. So I think it's that, again, highlighting that what you lose, I think, when something changes makes you realise how much you value it. And I guess just looking at the silver lining, perhaps, of this, I know sort of anecdotally, lots of people have told me that, they see more, particularly dads, being more involved, I guess, in dropping children off and being involved in their children's lives while they've perhaps been working at home rather than the office. So I do think potentially if this does lead to a more sort of family-friendly workplace, and I guess that's with the very sort of optimistic glasses on, but if it leads to a more family-friendly workplace, then maybe, families do have more opportunity to be engaged in their children's education. And, particularly at early childhood level where that is such a crucial thing, I think that would be a great silver lining if we could find it.
Thanks, Luke. So I have one final question for all of our panellists, and that is in 1 minute or less. What are you most excited about re the future of education? Stephanie, you first.
Okay, in 1 minute or less, I am excited that we are even having this conversation. I'm excited that there is a yearning for change and that we are now in a better place to see how we can make that change happen. I think for a long time this century, we've been understanding that the change is needed. We just didn't know how. And I think we are much further down that trajectory now. The collaborative voice is always going to be more powerful in bringing about that change than waiting for the bureaucracy to do it. So there are 400 people at least sitting on this webinar now. Let's have our collective voice shift forward to really change systems for the better future of our world.
Thanks, Stephanie. Andrew?
Very quickly, I think it's about embracing what we've learned, taking it forward, not be afraid to make mistakes. Failure is your best friend. Take it on board. If you fail, it doesn't matter. Just get back up and try again. And I'm sure as a collective, as Stephanie says, we will do well. We will implement change and not forget that we have done this. And the biggest fear I have, not maybe about it, is the fact that we'll go tomorrow and forget what we've done. And I think that's what probably excites me, is the fact that we've got to challenge that and make sure that we do not forget that we can do this, and we've got great opportunities to take this further.
Thanks, Andrew. Natasha?
I think it's incredibly exciting, and certainly exciting as a parent listening to everyone tonight. As a technology company, I think technology is going to be at the centre of education moving forward, and I think that brings opportunities for bespoke learning, targeted learning, individual, child-centric learning, enabling the school community to be a place where that whole person comes and flourishes. So I think the more efficient technology can make the learning, the greater the opportunities are for everyone to grow.
Thanks, Natasha. Luke?
I think from an early childhood perspective, one of the things I would hope comes out of the experience of this year is just the valuing of early childhood education in the wider community. I think early childhood always struggles a little bit with that kind of dichotomy between being seen as babysitting and being seen as education. And I would hope that, maybe out of this we start to see a bit more of a credit given to us as education. I don't know, maybe that's being too optimistic. I think as an early child teacher, you kind of have to be forever hopeful, otherwise you'd sort of give up. But I think there is that chance there for early childhood to be seen in that light. And I think we've seen a bit of that coming through already, not necessarily at a government level, but I think at a family level, where families have really appreciated what early childhood settings have done for them and for their children. And I think you do often see that in times of crisis, whether it's a pandemic or a natural disaster or a bushfire or something like that, often it is early childhood centres and schools that become that kind of centre of community where people have connections. So I would hope that something positive can come out of that in terms of just that view of early childhood education.
Thanks, Luke. Tiffany?
Firstly, that change is possible, that it's possible really fast and in a really holistic way. We've made changes overnight in the last year that we would never have imagined we would need to do or could do. Secondly, that rolls out into social equity areas that I'm working in. So I'm working with governments around banning conversion practices, including in the education system, where you see it up to about 8% of schools have that as part of schooling, but we're seeing a lot of shifting really fast this year in that area as well. So I just think holistic change is possible, and I'm hoping that people will start to believe in the possibility more in their work.
Thanks, Tiffany. Matt?
Yeah, it's the rapid change to me is so exciting, that it's exponential, that technology is just enabling us to do more and more. And it's not even now that, you're given a new technology and you think, oh, how can I use this to enhance my students' learning? You can almost just dream about pedagogically what you'd like to do, and then work the other way to find technologies or work to combine technologies to achieve the incredible pedagogical things that's only limited to your imagination. But in order to do it, I think we're going to have to use all of those things that we want to engender in students. We're going to have to be collaborative and creative and be critical. But if we do that, together with our enterprise and our best intentions for students, I think it's going to be amazing.
Thanks, Matt. So I just want to do a very quick kind of wrap up of some of the themes we've heard tonight. I'm conscious of time. I think I have 4 minutes to do this. But just thinking, I've been reflecting throughout about, you know, one of the key things at the beginning that people, you know, were challenged with was curriculum. And I think tonight we've got, instead of the big C of curriculum, I heard lots of other C's come through. And I'm just trying to remember these because I haven't got a pen to write them down. So, you know, there was creativity, curiosity, critical thinking, connectedness, community, collaboration. I mean, these were the C's that really came through for me tonight. And I mean, that's what excites me actually about the future, is that these are the conversations we're having. It's about those C's and not about, you know, some of those traditional elements that we worry about so much, like curriculum and content, which, yes, we've heard those are important, but let's think about these other C's. And I think that's a really exciting part of what we've talked about tonight. So now, just to conclude, the webinar has highlighted that it's important for us as a community of educators to think about a new vision of education for the future. One that needs to be agile, flexible and responsive to the challenges we're confronted by as a society. So I'd really like to say a massive thank you to our panellists. That has been amazing, and you know, answering those questions in the way you did was just fabulous. So thank you. Thank you to our attendees. Just so great to see so many people from around the world and from our local areas and nationally. Really great to see you. I'd also like to really thank our staff, the Academy staff, Leanne and Lee, for all of the organisation here, Ian, our Academic Director of the Academy, and then of course Dominique and Elizabeth, who've been helping us here behind the scenes. So a big thank you. None of these things ever happen without this kind of support. So you know, let's all sort of put our hands together. We won't hear it, but we can imagine you all putting your hands together for our support team here. NESA accreditation, so anyone who's attended, your NESA ID was requested, so you'll be able to claim that. I think Dominique's put a message up there in the chat about the claiming these hours for your NESA accreditation. And please complete the online feedback form. We'll send that out to you in the next 48 hours. We'd really like your feedback about the session, and we'll also send out, we had so many questions come in that, you know, the questions that have come in tonight, we've tried to manage some of those on the Q&A, but we will send responses to questions out to you after this event. So if you do have any other questions, please let us know. So I'd really like to say thank you. It's been wonderful to have you with us tonight, and good night.